Operation Arctic Fox, the attack of the century. Prologue, January 30th, 1945, 9:15 p.m. Captain 3rd Rank, Alexander Ivanovich Marinesko pressed his face against the eyepiece of submarine S-13's periscope. The Baltic Sea was cold even for January, but sweat ran down his back beneath his wool sweater. Through the periscope's optics, illuminated by the full moon, sailed an enormous liner, 9,000 tons displacement, maybe more. German flags on the masts were barely visible in the night darkness, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Wilhelm Gustloff, Marinesko, had heard of this ship, a pre-war cruise liner, pride of the Third Reich, personally launched by Adolf Hitler in 1937. Now she served as a floating barracks, a troop transport, a target ship. Distance 4 cables, Comrade Captain, Navigator Senior Lieutenant Anatoly Redkoborodov reported quietly. Marinesko did not pull away from the periscope. His hands were damp. This was the moment toward which his entire life had led. All the mistakes, all the triumphs, all the humiliations and awards, everything converged here, in these icy waters of the Baltic Sea, 2 kilometers from the Pomeranian coast. He knew what was happening on shore. He knew that Baltic Fleet Commander Admiral Vladimir Tribets had personally threatened him with court-martial if he returned from this patrol without results. He knew that the fleet staff officers called him a drunkard and a disciplinary violator. He knew that S-13's crew were the only people who still believed in him. Torpedo tubes ready for combat, the torpedo man reported. Marinesko lowered the periscope. In the red glow of the emergency lighting in the central post, his face looked haggard. He was 33 years old, but looked every bit of 40. 2 weeks at sea without proper sleep, constant tension, the fear of failure, all of it had left its mark. He turned to his crew. 30 men looked at him in the cramped confines of the Type S submarine's central post. Medium class, 9 bis series. A boat 77 meters long, displacement 840 tons, surfaced. Built at the Krasnoye Sormovo plant in Gorky, launched in 1939, survived the entire Leningrad blockade. Comrades, Marinesko's voice was quiet, but in the submarine's enclosed space, every word sounded distinct. In a few minutes, we will attack the largest target any Soviet submarine has seen in the entire war. The Germans are evacuating their troops, their officers, their submariners. This ship is packed with them to the waterline. If we sink her, we will deliver a blow they will feel all the way to Berlin. He paused. But I will not deceive you. The liner is traveling with escorts. After the attack, they will hunt us. Depth charges, anti-submarine ships, possibly aviation at dawn. Some of us may not return home. Silence. Only the hum of the diesels and the quiet hiss of hydraulics. Anyone who wants to stay deep and let this target pass, speak now. I will not judge anyone. The war is almost over. Everyone has the right to live to see victory. No one answered. Mechanic Nikolai Redkoborodov, the navigator's brother, crossed his arms. Torpedo man Petty Officer Ivan Popov smiled a crooked grin. Radio man Alexander Markov nodded. Marinesko allowed himself to smile for the first time in many days. Then prepare for attack. Beginning approach to position. Chapter 1. Commander under threat. To understand why Alexander Marinesko found himself here, in the icy waters of the Baltic, hunting a German transport under threat of court-martial, we need to go back 2 months, to December 1944, to Kronstadt. Alexander Ivanovich Marinesko was born January 15, 1913, in Odessa. The son of a Romanian sailor and a Ukrainian peasant woman, he grew up in a port city where the sea was part of life. At 17, he entered navigation school. At 20, drafted into the Navy. His career began on the destroyer Frunze, continued at the submarine school in Leningrad. By the beginning of the war in 1941, Marinesko was already an experienced submariner, commander of the small submarine M96. On M96, he proved himself a daring and effective commander. In August 1942, he attacked a large German convoy, Sank, a transport. For this success, he received the rank of Captain Third Rank and a new assignment, commander of the medium submarine S-13. S-13 was a significant promotion, a medium submarine capable of operating in the open sea with a crew of 46 men, armed with 4 bow and 2 stern torpedo tubes, range 9,000 miles, diving depth to 90 meters, speed underwater 9 knots, on the surface 19 knots. Marinesko received S-13 in April 1943 after the previous commander was removed from duty due to an ammunition explosion during exercises. The boat was considered problematic. The crew was demoralized. Technical condition left much to be desired. But Marinesko was exactly the commander who could turn a problematic boat into an effective weapon. He was demanding but fair, tough but caring about his men. The sailors of S-13 quickly understood their new commander would not ask them to do what he would not do himself. From 1943 to 1944, S-13 completed several combat patrols. The results were modest. Several transports, total displacement about 13,000 tons. The Baltic Sea by 1944 was one of the most dangerous theaters for Soviet submariners. The Germans had established powerful mine barriers, deployed effective anti-submarine defenses, patrolled every square kilometer of water. But Marinesko's real problems began not at sea, but ashore. Alexander Ivanovich possessed a character that simultaneously made him a brilliant commander and an unbearable subordinate. He was brave to the point of recklessness, stubborn to the point of insubordination, independent to the point of ignoring orders if he considered them senseless. And he drank heavily. Between patrols, Marinesko could disappear for several days, leaving the boat without a commander, spending that time in port bars or with women. Fleet staff officers repeatedly caught him drunk at inappropriate times. In December 1944, command's patience ran out. S-13 was supposed to deploy on a combat patrol in early January, but 2 weeks before departure, Marinesko disappeared, simply did not report for duty. They found him 3 days later in Tallinn, in the company of a nurse from the local hospital, completely drunk. Admiral Tribits summoned Marinesko to the carpet. "Comrade Captain Third Rank," Tribits's voice was icy. "Do you understand that for unauthorized absence during wartime, court-martial is prescribed? Execution is not excluded." Marinesko stood at attention. His uniform was rumpled. His eyes were bloodshot. "I understand, Comrade Admiral. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Marinesko was silent. What could he say? That the war had exhausted him? That after each patrol he saw exploding ships in his dreams, drowning people, heard screams? That the only way to silence this was alcohol? Command was not interested in his excuses. Tributes looked at him for a long time, then sighed. "Marinesko, you are a good commander, maybe even excellent, but you are unbearable as an officer. I should put you on trial, but the war is not yet over. We do not have so many experienced submariners that we can shoot them for drunkenness." He paused. "I am giving you one last chance, one final combat patrol. If you return with results, I will forget about your last escapade. If you return without results or get drunk again, court-martial. Is that clear?" "Clear, Comrade Admiral." Dismissed. Marinesko left the office, understanding this was his last chance not only to save his career, but to stay alive. Chapter 2. The Final Patrol. On January 11, 1945, submarine S-13 departed the naval base at Turku, Finland. Aboard were 46 crew members, Full fuel supply, 12 torpedoes, provisions for 3 weeks. The mission was standard: patrol in squares AS-58 and AS-64 in the Danzig Bay area. Attack enemy transports supporting German forces in East Prussia. By early 1945, the Germans were in desperate straits. The Red Army was advancing along the entire Eastern Front. East Prussia was cut off. Millions of German soldiers and civilians found themselves trapped between the advancing Soviet forces and the Baltic Sea. Operation Hannibal began, the largest naval evacuation in history. The German fleet gathered all available ships, military transports, passenger liners, cargo vessels, even fishing trawlers, to evacuate troops and refugees from East Prussian ports to Western Germany. For Soviet submariners, this was hunting territory. Targets moved in an almost continuous stream, but the risk was enormous too. The Baltic in January meant storms, icy water, poor visibility. German anti-submarine defense was among the most effective in the world. The first days of the patrol were disappointing. S-13 patrolled in the assigned squares, but there were no contacts. Marinesko was tense to the limit. Each day without results brought him closer to court-martial. On the night of January 21st, S-13 detected German patrol boats. Marinesko was on the surface when he suddenly saw the silhouette of another submarine. The German boat was also traveling surfaced. Both commanders saw each other simultaneously. The German commander, taking S-13 for his own boat, gave an identification signal. Marinesko did not respond. Instead, he sharply turned S-13 around and departed at maximum speed. The German did not pursue, probably never understood he had encountered an enemy. This was a lucky moment. One more second of hesitation, and the German boat would have opened fire from torpedo tubes. S-13 could have ended her career right there. On January 25th, during the day, the sonar operator reported propeller noise from a transport. Marinesko raised the periscope, but visibility was too poor. The target escaped. On the night of January 29th, another contact, a transport of about 2,000 tons displacement. Marinesko began closing for attack, but the transport also detected the submarine and opened fire from an automatic gun. Tracer rounds flew over the water. Marinesko decided to dive and withdraw. The risk did not justify the result. Time was passing, fuel supplies were shrinking, food was running out. The crew's morale was deteriorating. Everyone knew about the commander's situation. Everyone understood that returning without results meant the end for Marinesko. January 30th began routinely. Gray Baltic morning, cold sea, no contacts. Marinesko stood in the central post, studying the chart. S-13 was in the area of Cape Stolpmünde on the Pomeranian coast. At 9:10 p.m., the sonar operator suddenly tensed. Comrade Captain, propeller noise, bearing 273, distance large. This is a major target. Marinesko rushed to the periscope. Chapter 3, The Gustloff. What Marinesko saw through the periscope optics exceeded all his expectations. An enormous liner, almost 200 meters long, was traveling on a westerly course. Flags flew from the masts. The ship was well lit, deck lights burned, portholes glowed. Identify target type, Marinesko ordered. Navigator Redkoborodov checked the silhouette table. Comrade Captain, appears to be Wilhelm Gustloff class, pre-war passenger liner, displacement 25,000 tons, currently used as military transport. Marinesko felt his pulse quicken. 25,000 tons. This was an enormous target, the largest of the entire war for a Soviet submariner. Escorts? I see 2, possibly 3 escort vessels, patrol boats probably, maybe a minesweeper. This complicated the task. Escort vessels were specifically designed for hunting submarines. They had sonar, depth charges, experienced crews. But Marinesko did not hesitate. Closing for attack. bow torpedo tubes ready for combat. The Gustloff was traveling at about 12 knots. This was good speed, fast enough to complicate the attack, but not fast enough to escape from a submarine. Marinesko began the maneuver he had learned over years of submarine service. He had to reach a position ahead of the target, position S-13 perpendicular to Gustloff's course, and launch torpedoes from a distance that guaranteed hits. The problem was that the moon was full. Visibility was almost perfect. If anyone on the Gustloff or the escort vessels saw S-13's periscope, the attack would fail. The Germans would turn and flee at maximum speed, and the escorts would begin an anti-submarine attack. Going underwater, Marinesko ordered. Depth 18 meters, minimum speed, silent running. S-13 submerged. The sound of diesels ceased. Now the boat traveled on electric motors, almost silently. In the central post, you could hear your own breathing. Marinesko periodically raised the periscope for a few seconds, enough for observation, then quickly lowered it. Each periscope raising was a risk of detection, but without the periscope it was impossible to aim torpedoes. S-13 slowly reached position. Marinesko calculated the attack angle, target speed, distance. He had done this thousands of times in exercises, but never with such an enormous target. At 9:04 p.m., S-13 was in position. Marinesko raised the periscope one last time. The Gustloff was directly ahead, port side exposed. Distance about 600 meters. Perfect distance for torpedo attack. "Comrade Captain, ready to fire," the torpedo man reported. Marinesko looked through the periscope. Aboard the Gustloff were thousands of people. He did not know exactly how many, did not know who they were, soldiers, officers, refugees. At this moment it did not matter. This was a military target, an enemy transport supporting German forces. This was his job. Bow tubes, 3 torpedo salvo, interval 3 seconds, fire. The boat shuddered. Compressed air pushed the first torpedo from tube number 1, 3 seconds. Second torpedo from tube number 2, another 3 seconds. Third torpedo from tube number 3. 3 Type 53-38 torpedoes, each 7 meters long, weighing 1,615 kilograms, with a 300-kilogram warhead. Speed 44 knots, distance to target 600 meters. Torpedo running time, approximately 30 seconds. Marinesko began counting. Emergency dive. Depth 40 meters, full ahead. S-13 went sharply down. Ballast tanks filled with water. The boat gained depth quickly. In the central post, everyone froze. 30 seconds is an eternity when waiting for an explosion. 25 seconds. 20. 15. The sonar operator suddenly shouted, "Contact! Torpedoes on target!" And then came the explosion. The first torpedo struck the bow of the Gustloff. The explosion tore the hull plating. Water rushed into the forward compartments. 3 seconds. The second torpedo hit the middle section of the hull, directly beneath the former swimming pool of the liner. The explosion was so powerful it completely destroyed this section of the ship. Another 3 seconds. The third torpedo struck the engine room area. The explosion destroyed the main engines. The Gustloff lost way. At a depth of 40 meters, S-13's crew heard the explosions through the boat's hull. Dull, powerful impacts that shook the water. Then, secondary explosions. Something was detonating aboard the liner. Marinesko did not allow himself to celebrate. Silent running, course 90, listen for escort sonar. Several seconds later, the sonar operator reported, escort vessels changing course, moving toward explosion site. 1, 2 ships. They do not yet know where we are. This was luck. In the chaos after the attack, with the Gustloff transmitting distress signals and sinking, the escort vessels first rushed to the liner, not to search for the submarine. But this would not last long. "Comrade Captain," the sonar operator tensed. "I hear propellers. Fast vessel, coming straight at us." One of the escort vessels had turned. Its sonar began searching. "Depth 60 meters, Marinesko ordered. "Silent running. Everyone silent." S-13 dove deeper. At 60 meters depth, the boat's hull groaned from water pressure. This was a depth close to maximum for the Type S. A sound came from above. A metallic clang, the escort vessel's sonar scanning the water. The sonar beam passed by, then returned. Found contact. "They have detected us," the sonar operator said quietly. Marinesko gripped the handrails tightly. "Prepare for depth charges." Several seconds of silence. Then, an explosion. The depth charge detonated 30 meters from S-13's hull. The shock wave threw the boat sideways. The lights went out. Emergency lighting came on automatically. In the central post, paint fell from the bulkheads. One of the sailors fell. Second bomb. Closer. The explosion shook the boat so that people grabbed onto everything within reach. One of the instruments shattered. "Damage report," Marinesko shouted. "Leak in the stern compartment," the mechanic reported. "Small, under control. Steering operational. Torpedo tubes intact." Third bomb. Farther. The escort vessel was losing contact. Marinesko made a decision. Change course, 180 degrees, passing under the escort's keel. This was a risky maneuver. If S-13 passed directly beneath the escort vessel, its sonar might lose contact due to proximity, but it also meant passing just meters from a ship dropping depth charges. S-13 turned, moved slowly, silently. Above, the escort vessel's propellers could be heard passing directly overhead. The sound was deafening even through the water column and the boat's hull. Then, silence. The escort vessel passed by, lost contact, began searching in another direction. Marinesko waited another 10 minutes, then, rising to periscope depth. S-13 slowly surfaced. Marinesko raised the periscope. What he saw was simultaneously terrifying and mesmerizing. 3 kilometers astern, illuminated by moonlight and the escort's searchlights, the Wilhelm Gustloff was sinking, stern first. The enormous liner that just 20 minutes ago had been traveling at full speed, now slowly submerged into the icy Baltic water. Around the liner were hundreds of people in the water. Marinesko could see them even from this distance, tiny dark dots on the moon-silvered sea surface. Escort vessels tried to pick up survivors, but there were too many. Marinesko looked through the periscope in silence. He had just sunk the largest ship of his entire career, possibly the largest ship sunk by a Soviet submarine in the entire war. But the price of this victory was horrifying. He did not know then how many people exactly had died. The precise number would be established only after the war. About 9,000 people were aboard the Gustloff. Just over 1,000 were saved. The rest drowned in the icy water or died in the explosions. This was the largest maritime disaster in history, greater than the Titanic, greater than the Lusitania, greater than any other ship sinking in human history. But this was war, and the Gustloff was a legitimate military target. "Lower periscope," Marinesko said quietly. "Course north, continuing patrol." Chapter 4. The second hunt. S-13 departed the attack area. Marinesko knew the Germans would now patrol this area with doubled force. Every aircraft, every escort vessel would be searching for the Soviet submarine. He set course north toward Danzig Bay. Other evacuation convoys should be passing there. The following days were tense. S-13 was in constant readiness for emergency dive. German aviation actively patrolled. Several times the boat was forced to dive urgently to avoid detection. Torpedo supplies had shrunk. After the attack on the Gustloff, Marinesko had 9 torpedoes remaining, 3 in bow tubes, 2 in stern tubes, 4 spares. On February 9th, the sonar operator again reported contact. Propeller noise, large target traveling on a westerly course. Marinesko began closing. This was more difficult than with the Gustloff. The target was zigzagging, standard anti-submarine maneuver. The escort was more vigilant. Visibility was poor. It was snowing. Marinesko pursued the target for over 4 hours. Most of this time he could not see the ship visually, relying only on sonar data. For the hydrophone to work properly, S-13 periodically had to reduce speed almost to zero. At speed, own noise drowned out the target's sounds. This was an exhausting hunt. Each time S-13 lost contact, there was a chance the target had escaped completely. Each time the sonar operator managed to find it again. At 2:30 a.m. on February 10th, Marinesko finally reached position. He raised the periscope and saw a silhouette, a large ship, possibly an Emden-class cruiser. In fact, it was the transport General von Steuben, another evacuation ship, a former passenger vessel converted for military purposes. Distance 12 cables, about 2,200 meters, a long distance for torpedo attack, but there might not be another chance. Stern torpedo tubes, 2 torpedo salvo, fire. 2 torpedoes left S-13's stern tubes, flew through the dark water toward the target. Running time for torpedoes at this distance, about 1 minute. Marinesko kept the target in the periscope, counting seconds, and then explosion. 1 explosion, then 3 more. Secondary detonations. The torpedoes had hit ammunition or fuel. The Steuben flew apart. The ship, displacing 15,000 tons, sank in minutes. Over 3,000 people were aboard. Only a handful survived. Marinesko again ordered emergency dive. Again, S-13 escaped pursuit. Again, depth charges exploded in the water, but none hit close enough to cause serious damage. By February 15th, fuel supplies on S-13 were running out. Food was gone. Only a few torpedoes remained. Marinesko decided to return to base. Epilogue: The Price of Victory. On February 20, 1945, submarine S-13 entered the base at Turku. A crowd had gathered at the pier. Fleet staff officers, crews of other submarines, shore personnel. Everyone knew the boat that had carried out the attack of the century had returned. Marinesko came ashore first. He looked haggard. A month at sea, constant tension, the 2 greatest attacks of the war. But he was alive, and he had proven everything he needed to prove. Admiral Tribetz personally met him at the pier. Comrade Captain 3rd Rank Marinesko, congratulations on successful completion of the combat patrol. You sank 2 of the enemy's largest transports, total displacement over 40,000 tons. This is an absolute record for the Soviet submarine fleet. Marinesko saluted but did not smile. Awards came quickly. S-13 received the Order of the Red Banner. Marinesko was nominated for the title Hero of the Soviet Union, but he did not receive the Hero's Star. Fleet Command, remembering his past disciplinary violations, downgraded the award to the Order of the Red Banner. This was a blow. Other submariners who had sunk fewer ships received Hero Stars. Marinesko, who had set an absolute record, received an order. The war ended in May 1945. S-13 completed 1 more patrol in April, but there were no contacts after the war. Marinesko continued service until 1945, when he was demobilized. What happened next was a tragedy. Without the fleet, without the submarine, without the war that had given meaning to his life, Marinesko was lost. He worked in various positions: deputy director of a research institute, senior engineer, but nothing could replace what he had been, a submarine commander. In 1949, he was arrested on embezzlement charges, given 10 years in the camps. He served 3 years, was released early due to health. For many years, Alexander Ivanovich Marinesko lived in obscurity. The man who had carried out the attack of the century, who had sunk more enemy tonnage than any other Soviet submariner, was forgotten. Only in 1963 was he partially rehabilitated. In 1990, 11 years after his death, Alexander Ivanovich Marinesko was posthumously awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. He died November 25, 1963, in Leningrad of cancer. He was 50 years old. Several members of S-13's crew attended the funeral, those who had survived the war and remembered the commander who had led them into attack in the icy waters of the Baltic. Submarine S-13 was decommissioned after the war. Her hull was cut up for scrap. But the memory of her lives on. January 30th, 1945, a date forever entered into naval history, the date of the largest maritime disaster, the date of the greatest Soviet submariner's feat, the date when a commander under threat of court-martial carried out an attack that changed everything. Historical note: Alexander Ivanovich Marinesko, 1501-1913, 2511-1963, was a Soviet submariner, captain 3rd rank, commander of submarine S-13 from 1943-1945. Throughout the war under his command, S-13 sank 4 enemy transports with a total displacement of 42,600 tons, an absolute record for the Soviet submarine fleet. On January 30th, 1945, S-13 sank the liner Wilhelm Gustloff, 25,184 GRT, with 9,000 people aboard, the largest maritime disaster in history. On February 10, 1945, S-13 sank the transport General von Steuben, 14,760 GRT, with over 3,000 people aboard. Despite outstanding results, Marinesko did not receive the title Hero of the Soviet Union during his lifetime due to disciplinary violations. The hero's star was awarded posthumously in 1990.